This is round 11 of 15 from the 2014 World Rapid Chess Championship. Carlsen has black in this one versus Levon Aronian. This was day 3, the first round of day 3, and the first real threat to Carlsen. As we will see, this gets very, very wild, this game. So what did we have? We had the Ragozin. This is something I referenced in an earlier video that I had covered. Carlsen played the white side of the Ragozin defense and is also employing the Ragozin right now with bishop to b4. Bishop g5 in response. h6, bishop takes knight, queen takes knight. When Carlsen had the white side, he played queen a4. Instead, in this one, it's e3 being elected by Aronian. Black castles, rook c1, d takes c, bishop takes c, and now c5. This is starting to look like what exactly? Well, an isolated queen pawn position for one. Something maybe you would see out of Panov-Botvinnik attack, but okay, minus white's dark square bishop. The queen is hit. Okay, queen f5, knight g3, and queen to a5. This was already this is already starting to get quite interesting. You know, what if, let's say, queen to g6? You know, the queen plays here as a counterattacking move. There's still this tension between these pawns. Black is currently up a pawn. There's not the immediate recapture, right? There's not the immediate just takes right now. And so when you have these in-between moves, there's usually a lot of calculation needed. Now the queen plays to f5 and allows this counterattacking move. The queen has to go elsewhere, and okay, white gets that material back. However, what if the queen plays here, and now the knight can't move as easily with the counterattack against the queen? Well, here comes now bishop to d3. And what if this pawn just gobbles up another pawn? Knight h4 is a killer. That's game over. Queen is hit. She has no good square. Here's the only safe square directly for just a very, very brief moment. But after queen h7, knight f6, that's game over. That's a check, double attack against the queen. White is winning. So we don't have that. We don't have queen g6. You can be sure bishop d3 would be a silent but deadly reply. Well, I don't know about deadly, but after bishop d3, you certainly have to do something other than capturing on e3. Computer suggesting f5. If f5, and let's maybe even go one further because this still gets interesting. After f5, meeting that threat, knight c6. Well, let's say this pawn takes, you grab here. Look at queen b3. White is fully developed. What are these guys doing? Or the rook. This is crazy. The pawn is pinned. The bishop's hit. This pawn is hit twice. There's pressure on this bishop. Let's just say the pawn takes here, rook takes. I'm not even sure what to suggest here. If the knight develops, you could take on this square. You could then take the bishop. So what if something other than that? What if something other than the knight moving? Let's say the bishop goes away. Now comes knight takes f5. He's overloaded. Too many tactical things. This pawn is pinned. It's just a very, very violent position. Development is key. Black doesn't have it. So let's not get too crazy with grabbing pawns, in other words. So anyhow, after knight to e4, queen f5, knight g3, the queen gets to a safer section of the board where there's not these knights controlling every different square. All these squares are covered. Okay, so finally the recapture on d4, knight c6, queen e2, bishop d7, bishop's kicked back, watching over e5. This is a jumping point for one of the knights, so let's get there. Let's keep an eye on some kingside squares as well. Never know when there could be some tactic over here on the king side. Knight to e4. Attack is met with counterattack. Rook to c3. Okay, maybe one day preparing to double if this bishop is kicked off of this diagonal. Rook on a8 to d8, which is maybe paving the way for the bishop to simply drop back. And then this rook is brought to life, putting pressure on d4. Rook to d1, that was the only piece that wasn't contributing for Team White. And now b4, a very lashing out type of move. Decent chunk of time was spent here, 11:44 roughly. And, okay, so about 4 minutes was spent on this b5 move, and you're weakening quite a bit of squares with that, c5 and c6 namely. And if it's taken, well, this is working out fine. This is tactically fine for black. If bishop takes on b5, we would have knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and at the end of this, what do we have? The queen is currently overloaded, so you could take, well, there's a couple different ways you could take. You could take on b5, or you could take on d1 and then b5. You get the idea. This is fine if bishop takes b5. But we don't have that. Bishop d7 instead. b5, rook to c5, queen b6. The bishop is kicked back. There's also a flight square. Queen to e3, f5. Counterattack against the queen. A lot of both players are doing what? There's multiple moves that we're seeing here where just kind of ignoring the threat. You see one threat and it's like, that's not really a threat. This is a threat. And then they're coming back with something even stronger. You're attacking my queen? No. You're attacking my queen with your rook? No. I'm going to attack your queen with my pawn. Okay, so white now has to react. Okay, they react. Finally, you have to react back. And now there's some pressure against this knight. Additional pressure being placed against it. And even more pressure being placed against it soon. Both players have chewed on a lot of the clock at this point. 25 moves in. Both players are, as you can see, 3 minutes, around 3 minutes, around 2 minutes for Carlsen, 2 minutes for Aronian, 3 minutes for Carlsen. With this last capture, rook takes knight is in the air. The knight gets out of the way. More fuel is being added to the c6 square, the c6 knight. This pawn is still going at that kingside position, grabbing another pawn with check. The knight is there to recapture. Queen to d6. Gets out of the pin. Rook takes, pawn takes, queen takes. And now pawn takes. And this is where we have a big slip. But then again, the time is not on either player's side. Still a very wild position. Rook to f4 was played. And now black is in a very bad position. How Aronian follows up was with bishop to c4. What was a better try was queen to e7, getting the queen over on this side of the board, put pressure against that king, the g5 square in particular. There's this knight move, but there's queen check. Apparently best is the queen to block. If king here, can move the rook somewhere, get out of that. But we didn't have queen to e7. Rook here, I guess, preparing to crash through on this d4 square. Bishop c4, and now g5. The main idea behind that is to have finally a new square for the king. If this king is going to be in check on this, after bishop takes on e6, there's not really a great square for him to go to. If you go to a7, you're still vulnerable on this diagonal. If you go to this square, you're vulnerable on f7 or g6 to knight forks, or knight checks at the very least. So g5, I think the primary function is to have a new square for the king. And, well, what more is that pawn doing? Okay, he's defending at least the rook on f4, who was unprotected. Okay, so bishop takes e6. The queen's there to defend it indirectly. King g7, and now this rook is entering. This is a one position for white. Rook takes d4. Rook to b7 check. King comes up, and now we have queen to f3, which is apparently throwing the win away. And it's not so easily calculated, of course. Again, factoring in the time situation for both Aronian and Carlsen. I mean, who could blame Aronian for missing a quiet move? You know, it's very tempting to just want to go with something forcing, much more easily calculated, maybe better stated. The move played was queen to f3, and then we had king takes bishop. The winning move apparently was to drop the bishop back, and now there's the potential for maybe this check or the computer suggestion queen to c3. This is the move I had wondered about. What do you do after king takes knight? Apparently this is the top recommendation of the computer. A quiet move, placing the rook in a pin, and it's a tough move to see. It's not the only move at this point. There is also queen to f3 at this point, and it still seems to have a pretty strong favor for white. But apparently best is to make sure this rook is simply immobile due to the pin, and now there's potential for maybe the queen sweeping over to g3. Maybe the knight could be contributing. This is also the other main idea after the queen is playing to the c3 square, just to show one variation, because this is still a very complicated position. After queen to c3, if rook to f8, we could have rook to b5 check, and a pop quiz for you, the viewer. What would you do if black played king to f6? If you'd like to, pause the video, see if you can figure out the winning continuation from this position. Okay, the winning continuation is not knight to e4. This is the most tempting move and the one that I went for, but I miscalculated. King to g6. You're losing your queen, right? Well, not so fast. Rook to g4, that's a check. If you go to the corner, you're going to get mated. So what do you have to do? You have to give the queen back. And at the end of it, who's better? Team black. So you don't want to go that route. So after bishop b3, where are we at? Bishop b3, king takes knight, queen c3, rook f8. After this check and king to f6, you don't go forward with this fork. You take the bishop. And now, if rook takes rook, there's no longer this idea of rook g4. You could always play king to h1 if that's the case, or go elsewhere. Check now at this point. Okay, if you do this, now this is a different story, right? There's no crazy check over here. There's no follow-up mate, in other words, since this rook is over here on b8. But that was an interesting combination that I came across. I fumbled with that one. I'm sure many of you fumbled for it too, or fumbled into this knight to e4 move. Very, very tempting, trying to exploit the pin here, right? Usually it's a good idea to do that, but not in this case. So what did we have in this game? We, instead of bishop to b3, we had queen to f3, king takes bishop, queen to f7 check. This queen is won. But is it really going to be enough? Turns out it's not going to be enough. Eventually the bishop and knight are exchanged. Black is able to stay coordinated. And this is turning out to simply be a draw. The rook is a few checks, and soon enough, after move 56, both players agree to a draw. So a very exciting game. One of the more exciting ones. I believe the game Carlsen versus Sergei Karyakin was very exciting, but this is certainly up there on the exciting factor. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed it. That's all for this video, and feel free to click the annotation link at the end of this video for round 12 of this tournament, or check in the video's description for links to the 14 other games.